Hello, comrades, and I guess welcome to my new project, where I will cover the revisionism of Leon Trotsky and Trotskyism. While Trotsky is celebrated by many, his ideas and actions reveal a legacy of opposition to Lenin, vision and fundamental Marxist principles, basically. His theory created deep rifts that are still seen in the Marxist movement today, and this, as it is right now, will be a two-part project. Part 1 of the project has chapter 1 to 6, and part 2 will have chapter 7 to 11, but maybe other parts will also follow, maybe with more chapters or other stuff. All main sources are listed below, so I guess that's all for the introduction, so let's just begin. Also, something for the start that I want to mention is that I'm very sorry if I pronounce any city or any names wrong, but I try to do my best with basically just pronouncing them so you can properly understand what I mean. Thank you. Chapter 1: Revisionism of Trotsky and Trotskyism before 1917. Trotsky and his followers often identify as Bolsheviks, but historically Trotskyism was fundamentally hostile to Bolshevism. Bolshevism as a political current and party emerged in 1903, and Trotsky rejected Lenin's concept of a new type of party from the outset. At the Second Congress of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, RSDLP, in 1903, Trotsky aligned with Lenin's opponents during the debates on the party charter. Lenin's positions were ultimately supported by the majority, who became known as the Bolsheviks. In contrast, Trotsky, along with Martov and Axelrod, belonged to the minority faction, known as the Mensheviks. Trotsky's criticism of Lenin during this period is telling. In his 1904 book, Our Political Tasks, Trotsky expressed sharp opposition to Lenin's work, one step forward, two steps back, accusing Lenin of cynically manipulating Marxism. Quote, "Truly, it is impossible to treat the best ideological property of the proletariat with greater cynicism than Lenin does. For him, Marxism is not a method of scientific research that imposes great theoretical obligations. No, it is a doormat when you need to cover up your tracks, a blank screen when you need to then demonstrate your greatness, a folding yardstick when you need to present your party consigns." End of quote. In another passage, Trotsky attacked Lenin's definition of social democracy. Quote, "The leader of the reactionary wing of our party, Comrade Lenin, was forced to give a definition of social democracy that represents nothing other than a theoretical attack on the class character of our party. Yes, a theoretical attack that is no less dangerous than the critical ideas of some Bernstein." End quote. During the years 1910 to 1914, the RSDLP was not a unified party, but consisted of separate factions with their own publications and leadership. The main factions were Lenin's Bolsheviks and the Menshevik groups, including Trotskyists and the Otsavists. The Trotskyists attempted to mediate between the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks, but effectively supported the Menshevik liquidators. During World War I, Trotskyism was associated with centrism, a trend within international social democracy that wavered between social chauvinism and petit bourgeois pacifism, advocating for reconciliation between revolutionary socialists and opportunists. Chapter 2: Marxism and Trotskyism in Understanding the Permanent Revolution. The theory of permanent revolution was first articled by Marx and Engels in the appeal of the Central Committee to the Communist League in March 1950, addressing the German Revolution. Their key points were: 1. The German bourgeoisie failed to lead the 1848 to 1849 revolution, compromising the feudal forces. 2. In a future revolution, the urban petty bourgeoisie, peasantry, and proletariat would lead, though the petty bourgeois Democratic Party would eventually betray the cause. 3. The proletariat must independently push the bourgeois democratic revolution towards a proletarian revolution, extending it until the establishment of a proletarian dictatorship. 4. The revolution in Germany should move through a stage of petty bourgeois democratic power, eventually leading to proletarian rule. 5. The revolution in Germany would gain momentum from a simultaneous proletarian victory in France. These principles outlined a continuous process of revolution from bourgeois to proletarian rule, challenging the traditional role of the bourgeoisie. Lenin adopted a similar stance during the 1905 and 1907 Russian Revolution, asserting that the proletariat would lead the revolution with the peasantry as ally, transforming it into a socialist revolution. He argued that the revolution would inspire similar uprisings in Europe, which in turn would support the Russian proletariat. Trotsky is often credited with advancing the theory of permanent revolution, but this view is misleading. Trotsky's ideas were largely borrowed from Parvus. In the 1915 article in Nashe Slovo, Trotsky wrote, quote, "Together with Parvus, we defended in Nachalo the idea that the Russian Revolution is the prologue to a social revolutionary era in Europe, that the Russian Revolution cannot be carried to the end, either by collaboration with the liberal bourgeoisie or by alliance with the revolutionary peasantry, that it can succeed only as part of the European proletarian revolution." End quote. Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution was fundamentally opposed to Lenin's views. Trotsky rejected the idea of an alliance between workers and peasants, believing that socialism in Russia was only possible through a broader European revolution. He argued against the dictatorship of the proletariat and considering it unrealistic. Trotsky's skepticism towards peasant alliance mirrored the ideas of Ferdinand Lassalle, who viewed the proletariat as the sole revolutionary force, dismissing other classes as counter-revolutionary. In contrast, Lenin emphasized the necessity of an alliance between workers and peasants, envisioning workers' and peasants' power as the foundation of a proletarian dictatorship. Lenin also criticized Trotskyism for dismissing the possibility of socialism in a single country, which Trotsky believed was impossible without a worldwide revolution. Lenin countered this by saying, quote, "Uneven economic and political development, it is an absolute law of capitalism. It follows that socialism can initially triumph in a few or even in one capitalist country separately." End quote. This statement underscored Lenin's belief that socialism could emerge in one country first, which would then support and inspire global proletarian movements. Chapter 3: Trotsky during the October Uprising. According to historical accounts, Trotsky's role during the October Uprising was not as central as it is often claimed. For instance, it is documented that, quote, Trotsky did not work in the party center and was not involved in the general leadership of the uprising, much less its technical side, end quote. Trotsky made a critical misstep by publicly revealing the planned dates of the Bolshevik uprising during a meetup of the Petrograd Soviet. This premature disclosure almost gave the counter-revolutionaries an advantage. To prevent the provisional government from countering their plans, the Bolshevik Central Committee decided to launch the armed uprising earlier than planned, just one day before the Second Congress of Soviets convened. There are claims that Trotsky attempted to disrupt the armed uprising against the provisional government by insisting that the Bolsheviks delay the insurrection until the Second Congress of Soviets opened on the evening of October 25th. This insistence, according to some accounts, was part of a broader attempt to replace armed struggle with more legal parliamentary means. Vladimir Ivanovich Klushin, in his brochure Little Known Information About Trotsky, provides further criticism of Trotsky's actions. Quote, Trotsky led the matter to the disruption of the military technical preparation of the armed uprising. He also launched a lively organizational work among the masses in the Petrograd Soviet, which turned into a continuously functioning discussion club. All his activity during this important period showed that he intended to replace the uprising with legal means of struggle. The convocation of a Congress of Soviets and then a constituent assembly which would determine in whose hands power would end up as a result of the revolutionary coup. End quote. Chapter 4: Trotsky during the Civil War and Trotsky's Anti-Marxism. Trotsky often found himself at odds with Lenin, notably during the debate over the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which allowed Russia to exit World War I. While Lenin saw the treaty as necessary to preserve the fledgling Soviet state, Trotsky took a different stance, violating party discipline by unilaterally halting negotiations. This move left Russia vulnerable to invasion. Quote, Trotsky threw up his hands, telling the Germans that he would never agree to what they wanted in the Brest-Litovsk peace treaty, and urging Lenin to adopt a no war, no peace policy. The Ukrainian capital of Kiev fell to the Germans on March 1st. Trotsky, furious, said that Russia should rejoin the Entente and resume the war. Lenin, fearing the capture of Petrograd and the destruction of his fledgling regime, moved his government to Moscow and said no. End quote. On January 11, 1918, the Central Committee debated the advisability of concluding peace. Lenin's position was defeated by Trotsky and his supporters, who advocated for delaying the treaty. Even bourgeois historian Felshtinsky noted that Bukharin, a key critic of Lenin, sided with Trotsky. Despite these setbacks, Lenin sought to compromise by delaying negotiations, a proposal that was accepted by the Central Committee. However, Bukharin even plotted the arrests of Lenin, Stalin and Sverdlov to establish a socialist government composed of left communists and left SRs, social revolutionaries, favoring revolutionary war. Lenin eventually telegraphed his views on the necessity of signing a peace treaty with Germany, but Trotsky continued to resist, betraying Lenin's strategy. At the 7th Emergency Party Congress in March 1918, Lenin criticized Trotsky's tactics. Although Trotsky's delays were useful, his refusal to sign the treaty after the Germans issued an ultimatum was, according to Lenin, a grave mistake. Quote, Trotsky's tactics were correct. They became incorrect when the state of war was declared, terminated, and peace was not signed. We could not have gotten a better peace than the Brest peace. End quote. This stand by Trotsky allowed the Germans to resume their offensive on February 18, 1918, which forced Lenin to act decisively. Despite resistance from Trotsky and Bukharin, Lenin ultimately secured the majority needed to resume peace talks. Even though Trotsky finally voted for peace, he resigned as People's Commissar of Foreign Affairs in protest, a move Lenin and Stalin tried to dissuade. Lenin further denounced Trotsky's actions during the 7th Congress of the RCP, of the Russian Communist Party Bolsheviks, pointing out the absurdity of Trotsky's position that favored a middle ground, which Lenin believed confused the party's resolution and undermined their cause. In his article on the revolutionary phrase, Lenin criticized Trotsky and the left communists, accusing them of falling into the trap set by the Anglo-French bourgeoisie, who were using the situation to weaken Soviet power. Lenin noted that Trotsky's stance was a classic example of succumbing to revolutionary phrases rather than practical Marxist strategy. So the basic key points are: 1. Trotsky constantly opposed Lenin's approach to peace with Germany. 2. He aligned with Bukharin and the left communists, creating significant rifts within the party. 3. Trotsky's refusal to sign the treaty even after a German ultimatum led to renewed hostilities and endangerment the revolution. 4. Lenin's harsh criticism highlighted Trotsky's anti-Marxist deviations, which he believed jeopardized the Soviet state by opening the door to German imperialism. Chapter 5. Did Trotsky create the Red Army? The claim that Trotsky created the Red Army is a popular but inaccurate assertion. The Red Army was established without Trotsky's involvement, and he was not its primary organizer. On January 28th, on January 15 Old Style, 1918, Lenin signed a decree by the Council of People's Commissars to create the Workers' and Peasants' Red Army. The All-Russian Collegium for the organization and management of the Red Army was established under the People's Commissariat for Military Affairs, with members including Podvoisky, Eremeyev, Mekonoshin, Krylenko, Trifonov, and Yurenev. Notably, Trotsky was not a member of this group. At that time, he served as People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs, and his misleading of negotiations led to the unfavorable Brest Peace Treaty for Soviet Russia. Trotsky's disruption of peace talks with Germany resulted in a German offensive, which was halted by Red Army units near Pskov and Narva on February 23, 1918. If this date is considered the birth of the Red Army, it is clear that Trotsky played no role in its creation, as he was still serving in a different capacity. The first People's Commissar of Defense in Soviet Russia was Nikolai Ilyich Podvoisky, an old Bolshevik who served from December 10, 1917 to March 14, 1918. On March 4, 1918, Lenin initiated the formation of the Supreme Military Council, led by Mikhail Bonch-Brujevich, with Prosheyan and Shutko as commissars. Trotsky was appointed chairman of the Supreme Military Council only on March 19, 1918, while Bonch-Brujevich continued to serve in a parallel leadership role. In January 1918, the First Corps of the Red Army in Petrograd, primarily composed of workers in Petersburg. By March 1918, this unit had expanded significantly and participated in battles against the Germans near Narva, Vitebsk, and Orsha. Trotsky arrived after much of the foundational work for the Red Army had already been completed. The creation and initial development of the Soviet armed forces were well underway before Trotsky's involvement. Chapter 6: Trotsky and the defeat of Kolchak and Denikin. The claim that Trotsky was responsible for winning the Russian Civil War is a misconception. The defeat of White Army leaders like Kolchak and Denikin was primarily due to the efforts of others within the Soviet military leadership. From 1918 to 1924, several individuals held the crucial role of Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the RSFSR, a position distinct from Trotsky's role as chairman of the Revolutionary Military Council. Joachim Vatsaitis was the first to hold this post until July 9, 1919, after which Sergei Sergeyevich Kamenev took over. Kamenev, a distinguished Soviet military leader, not to be confused with L.B. Kamenev, played a key role during the Civil War. He continued to serve under Mikhail Vassilievich Frunze after Trotsky was removed from his position as chairman of the People's Commissariat of Military and Naval Affairs and chairman of the Revolutionary Military Council. For his service, Kamenev was awarded the Order of the Red Banner in 1920. In addition to these leaders, several commanders were pivotal in the Russian Civil War, including Badiony, Chapayev, Blinov, Voroshilov, Shrokhs, Kikvince, Atsin, Dumenko, Katovsky, Karkomenko, Timoshenko, and Fabricius. Prominent figures such as Stalin, Kirov, Kuibyshev, Orchondikidze, Anishimov, Podvoisky, and others also held significant commissars' positions within the Red Army during this period. The Red Army's successes were largely due to the introduction of the institution of military commissars, who oversaw former Tsarist officers who had joined the Soviet forces. This system ensured that the ex-Tsarist officers remained loyal to the Soviet cause. Interestingly, Trotsky opposed the establishment of military commissars and had a tendency to trust former Tsarist officers, resisting the leading role of the Russian Communist Party Bolsheviks within the Red Army. So those were the first 6 chapters of my new series on Trotskyist revisionism. I hope you liked it, and again, to apologize for the, in my opinion, many things that I mispronounced. I will try to do it better. Like every time, I will try to do it better. But I still hope you can understand it, and if not, just ask in the comments what you haven't understood, so I can maybe correct it in the next part, or I will just write the name or the city or whatever I mispronounced. So thank you for listening, and have a great time, comrades.